morning, brothers and sisters. Welcome to Trinity Church on this Palm Sunday. Welcome to our continued conversation, which we've titled Trinity and Race, this intersection between who we are as a community now, our history from our inception back in 1849, and the intersection of race. We started back in 1849. We looked at the early years. We've noted missing a lot of history from the early 1900s and then down to what we call the modern civil rights era in the late 50s and through the 60s. And the blessing that we have is with us today, once again, is Dr. Liz Colton, who, a lifelong member of Trinity Church, was a very active member of our youth group at Trinity during this era, and has lots of history there. And we're welcoming to our conversation today Al Whitesides, who's been a member of the Asheville community for many years and a leader in the Asheville community. And so now, as we did last week, we are spreading out this look at our history to the greater history of our city in which we are a part of, the city of Asheville. And I think the best way for us to do this is to ask Dr. Colton to introduce our guest this morning. Liz?
Well, thank you so much again, Scott. And it's a real honor to be here and to be asked about this history of here in Asheville and Buncombe County in Western North Carolina. And starting with the role that I remembered that our church, Trinity, played with our Episcopal young churchman, our minister, Mr. Tootin, and the bishop of the Episcopal bishop of Western North Carolina, Bishop George Henry, in encouraging some of the young people in the churches who were interested and beginning to participate in the civil rights movement. And so it was my great privilege and honor to be one of the early white members of the Asheville Student Committee on Racial Equality, ASCORE, ASCORE, which started in 1959. And some of the early meetings were out in the Oaks, which was the headquarters for the Episcopal Diocese of Western North Carolina. And one of my colleagues, and it's been, so then I went off for many years after I went to college. But when I came back, I found friends that we had known each other, not well, but we had known each other across segregated lines. People like Dr. Orlean Simmons and other friends, and also our now Buncombe County Commissioner, Mr. Al Whitesides, and Al's wife, Shirley. We were all teenagers, and we were working across segregated lines because the schools were segregated, everything was segregated. And so today I'd like to introduce Al, and I'm going to want him to talk a little about certain points in his life, which are quite remarkable. And then I think Scott and he especially will talk about, where we go from here. But Al, welcome, and thanks so much for coming and being with us today. I'd like to ask you if you could just give us kind of a thumbnail sketch of what was the segregation. What did it mean in your life at that time, which people nowadays don't even realize what it was, segregation?
I agree with you. Well, first of all, I'd like to say it's a pleasure to be here to have this conversation today. And before I start, on a personal note, two heroes of mine who were members of Trinity is Liz's mom and dad, because they were not only supportive during the ASCORE time, they were supportive of me during the time when I started at First Union, because I was the first African-American on the management team.
Mhm.
And over the years, I had a relationship with both of them
Thank
that I
you.
still value to this day. But let's back up. Let's talk about it. I was born here in November 25th, 1944, in the Colored Hospital, where
Oh,
Jesse Ray's funeral home used to be there on Biltmore Avenue. Now it's a parking lot. Since then, it's been torn down. But I came up in a time in Asheville when it was segregated, and I even have to tell these stories now to my grandkids because they look at me sometimes, the boys, and they're adults now, but they said, that didn't happen that way, Grandpa. But it did. When I came up, we had colored and white water fountains in the department stores, colored and white restrooms where they had them. We had to go to the back door in some of the restrooms, some of the restaurants to be served. And I often laugh about it. When I'd go out to Buck's restaurant, though, before they open up, I'd walk in the dining room, go there and get served because my uncle was the head cook there. Nobody would say nothing. He was the chef. So he pretty much ran the place. But but that's what we grew up in. If you go to the bus, it's the back of the bus. You pay and then you have to go to the back of the bus. But all of this sort of
And
tells
the
you,
movie theaters, the plaza, you had to sit
oh,
upstairs.
sit upstairs. Yeah, but I like that. We had better view, really. And the other one, though, that was aggravating to me, Liz, don't forget the library.
Yeah,
We
the
couldn't go
library.
in the packed library, and they had in the Y building, which is right around the corner, less than 5 minutes walk to the library, was one room, the colored library. And what used to aggravate me, if we needed a book they didn't have, and we ordered it from Pack around the corner, it would take sometimes 5 days to get it. And that's just, that was it. But that's Asheville that, I came up in. On the other hand, though, it wasn't like a lot of communities. I grew up off Pearson Drive on Gray Street. Right running alongside was Birch Street, which was all white, and Gray Street was all black. But we all played together. A good friend of mine was all state playing football at Lee Edwards, and he wouldn't have made the team at Stevens Lee. He was too slow.
Well, and
we laugh about that today, but this is what we were, this is the Asheville that I came up in. And then in 59, I think some of the students, it's like Miss Fannie Lou Hamer said, we were sick and tired of being sick and tired of treated the way we were. So that's when we started A School. And, the rest is history. And we really did. A School went on from 59 until Stevens Lee closed in 65. And we didn't realize what we had accomplished really till years later, because it was like a track meet. One class we would leave, go off to college, the next one would come up, and we continued it, for the end. And that we integrated what, Liz? Movie theaters, restaurant, lunch counters,
library, everything.
library. We did it. Even I got a job. Look, we had to fight for me to get a job as a bag boy at A&P, and
At
that
the
was all
A&P,
part of
right.
it. Yeah. But
And we picketed that.
we sure did. Oh yeah, we picketed. Yeah, we boycotted. We sure did. Yeah.
It strikes me as kind of remarkable that the major civil rights organization, an active civil rights organization in town, was high school students.
Well, it was but the adults were involved, but this was certainly an amazing, it was unique and really to Asheville, and it certainly had a huge influence on the rest of my life, and I know on everybody.
Yeah, and especially what's surprising, you see, we didn't have a historically Black college in this area. So it was up to the high school kids when they were doing it at A&T and across the state at North Carolina. But here, it was no historically Black college, so the high school students did it. And I would say one of our advisors, though, the A School, was vice president of the NAACP chapter.
Mm,
And like Liz said, we had parents,
Mhm.
we had churches backing us, we had a lot of support,
absolutely.
behind us. Yeah, we did.
So why don't you tell us, I want a couple of little stories from you before you came back as a banker too. But you went down to Morehouse in Atlanta when you graduated, I think in 1962.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
and
okay.
well, whenever. And so tell us just a little about your meeting Martin Luther King Jr., because you were coming straight from Asheville and A-score and civil rights already.
Right. Right. Well, when I went down to Atlanta, what I didn't realize at the time, my great uncle, Thomas Kilgore Jr., who graduated from Morehouse College, came up here in Brevard and graduated from Stevens Lee High School that I went to. Well, I knew that Uncle Thomas worked his way through school at Morehouse, and I also know that he was close to a Baptist minister there in his family. But what I didn't, at the time, the King family meant nothing to me. I was just another minister. Well, Uncle Thomas, when Dr. King's father, and mom would go out of town, Uncle Thomas would keep the kids. He would stay there in the house with them. And when he first met Martin Luther King Jr., he was 2.5 years old. So he knew, he was like a member of the family. Well, when I went down to Morehouse, he told me to be sure and go to Ebenezer. He told the Kings to expect me. He had given them my name and all. I said, high school, so yes. And I'd been there, it was up to Thanksgiving Day, and he was coming back from trustee meeting at Morehouse, and he was preaching that Sunday at West Hunter Street Baptist Church, which was Ralph Abernathy's church. So it was only a block from campus. So I said, well, I better put on my clothes and go. And my roommate still holds it against me today because he had the opportunity to go and didn't. And I told him, but he didn't want to go to church, but he didn't know, who was going to be there. Of course, then it wasn't like now. Well, I went over to church, and that was my first Sunday I'd been to church since being there, by the way. And I walk in, sit down. After the service was over, Uncle Thomas told me to wait. He and Ralph, they were taking me out to dinner, which, boy, I was looking forward to, and didn't have to eat campus food. But while I was standing at the back of the church waiting on them to come, this young man walked up, well-dressed, and he walked over to me, and he said, "You must be a Kilgore." And I said, "No, I'm a Whitesides." But I said, "Yeah, my mom is a Kilgore." I said, "How did you know that?" He said, "You all look alike." And then he stuck out his hand and said, "I'm Martin King. And your uncle used to babysit me." We started talking. I said, "Well, nice to meet you." And he had just moved back from Montgomery home, to the church. And he was headed then out of town. And I remember him telling me, "My mom is looking for you at Ebenezer." And he said, "If you don't be there next Sunday, she'll probably come to Graves Hall. That's where the freshmen stay and get you." So I did. But that's when I first met him. And just one of the nicest guys, just down to earth, just like anybody else. And I told Liz, just to sit and talk to him, he would all but put you to sleep. But when you put him up in front of 1,000 people, he was like a different person. Yeah.
Wow.
And he, by the way, he was not the best speaker in his family. His dad was. Yeah.
Oh,
By far.
fascinating.
Yeah. His dad.
Fascinating.
Interesting. And then you also had an amazing moment at the night of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. You were by then at North Carolina Central.
I will never forget that. We were at Duke University listening to Congressman Adam Creighton Powell Jr. And all of a sudden, he was, Powell he's very flamboyant. You know how he was. He was really going. And a fellow walked up to him and pulled him aside. And I remember him saying loud, we heard him, "Oh my God." And that's when he got the message that Dr. King had been assassinated. And that was the first time we heard it. And it was a lot of us. As a matter of fact, Shirley was with me, my wife. We weren't married then, but she was with me when that happened, a group of students. And I always remember he went back. He would not stay on Duke's campus.
Adam Clayton Powell.
Yeah, Adam Clayton Powell went back with us and spent the night in the chancellor's residence at North Carolina College then, before it was North Carolina Central. Yeah. But that was probably one of the worst moments that I can remember, because nobody knew what was going to happen at that moment. Yeah.
1968. And when did you come back as a banker and decide to come back home and go into banking, which was all white?
Well, let me tell you this. See, I came up, my dad was the janitor at First Union for 25 years. Before going over to, well, when he retired, he was assistant vice president, security officer, and over the facilities at Asheville Savings. But
wow.
I came up around the bank helping my dad clean up. So after college, I was in the reserves then. I had to do active duty in the Navy during Vietnam. So when I was at home, Dad said, Jim Glenn, who was over the region then, would like to talk to you. So my dear, I had planned to go back to law school. Banking wasn't, and think about it, back then coming up in the South, banking is the last place I thought I could have a good career in. So I went up, met with Jim Glenn. I'll never forget it. He changed my flight. I was headed back to Long Beach, and I went through Charlotte, and they interviewed me. You know, I went through, met a lot of people.
And what year was that about?
That was 1970. Yeah. And I was ready to go. I just thought it was complimentary. He was being nice. You know how Mr. Glenn was, Liz. And I didn't think anything about it. The day when we were getting ready to leave, I got a letter from First Union offered me a job. And at the time, I was close to our captain, and I said, nah, I'm not going back to work. He said, wait a minute, Whitesides, didn't you tell me you were going to have to work a few years, then save your money and go to law school? I said, yeah. He said, that's the opportunity. Why are you going to turn it down? So I sent it back to them. They hired me before I even finished the cruise. So I didn't get out of the Navy until May of 71. And I started to work for the bank in June of 71. And that's really how I started. And I'll give you just a laugh before, you know, when I started to work for the bank, being the first African-American, when I got to Asheville, it was two other trainees, three of us were assigned here, and both were white. And they all but told me, Al, we've got your back if you have any problems. And I remember one lady, Miss Clark, who had known me since I was a kid coming up around the bank, was over the bookkeeping area, and we had to go through all the areas, and she was explaining to us what she did. And she said, now, boys, don't ask me any questions until I'm through, and I'll tell you when to ask questions. Okay. So Joe Johnson, a good buddy of mine, even today, asked her something. She said, didn't I tell you, wait? She said, I know all of you think you're going to be president of the bank someday, but you're not now. You know, and she just, you know, so Joe was quiet. 5 minutes later, I asked her something. She said, oh, yeah. And she went on and, you know, answered it. And Joe spoke up and said, well, Miss Clark, you answered Al, but you didn't ask. She said, he's one of us. You're not.
That was because you'd grown up there.
That was it. And Joe, I saw him a few years ago. We had lunch here, and we still laugh about that. We never forget. Matter of fact, she lived to be almost 100 years old, and I was at her funeral. And when I thought about that, I just stood there and smiled. You know, it was so funny. Yeah, and we stayed in touch. Yeah, she followed me whenever she'd have a banking problem, even when I was working out of Charlotte. she could find me when my parents couldn't, or my wife.
But you had, but when you did come back, of course, you did have, I mean, you were one of the very first to
Oh, yeah.
come and to be
Yeah.
in what had been mostly all white.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
It-
And it was interesting during that time too, because, you know, I, had, it was some, I remember one of our largest customers didn't want me to have anything to do with his business.
Hmm.
But do you know, we got to be very close. And when he was dying of cancer in the hospital, I had to go up. His wife said he wanted to see me. And all he wanted to talk about, and I'd forgotten him because after a couple of years, I was handling everything for him. But he apologized to me for the way he
Wow.
treated me at first. And, and that was a lot. But, and the reason I ended up there, when time come for me to leave after 3 years, I was vice president. I enjoyed what I was doing. I said, hey, I don't think I want to be a lawyer. So I never made it to law school.
Please correct me if I've got this wrong, but it seems, if I remember correctly from just reading the history, is that access to banking and mortgage and loans was a huge piece of the oppression that African Americans faced for many decades. And so, I mean, it strikes me that you being a part of that industry was a huge change, and gave maybe a way of access to that wasn't there as much.
Let me give you one good example of what I ran into early on. I was, like I said, when I came through, we had to do everything. And here again, in bookkeeping, working with Miss Clark. This was after I was back. I had to do a few weeks there, and I noticed something. Then they were paying checks. It was before computers by hand. And I noticed something. The signature cards, you could tell who was Black and who was white. And let me tell you, and only I could pick that up from being here. I knew it. All of the African Americans, it was Joe, Alfred, or whatever, Susie, whatever. But all the whites, it was Miss, Mr., doctor, so and so, or whatever. Even one of the Black doctors, I noticed, it was just his name. Wow. So I asked Miss Clark about that. I said, why are we doing this in this day and time? She said, well, Alfred, some things don't change. Well, a few weeks later, when I was back in the branch, that we would not email then, we had memos going out. And I noticed a memo came about telling our account services reps going forward, don't put titles on signature cards, just names. Mm-hmm. So that stopped it. But it's just asking. And, I saw redlining. Oh, you wouldn't believe, in making loans. I uncovered a lot, but one thing about me, and it goes back to A-score days, I would bring it up. When I was here, I would, but what I would do it in a way, it was like a Columbo move. I'd ask the question. But
one more question.
They knew exactly where I was going. Yeah. But I saw how Asheville had been redlined. They had sections that was all Jewish, for Jews, African American. It was unreal, the redlining here. And in later years, I have one around here somewhere. I have one of the maps that I got a hold of. Yeah. Wow. But and that's one of the things that I knew then early on. I said, look, I've got to we knew when I came along, my generation, we were trailblazers. Mm-hmm. We knew we had to take more than most, but we were paving the way for others to follow. And that was part of it. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you. Fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And one of the brothers and sisters who are with us in this time, one of the important questions for us is what's next, and as you know, Mr. Whitesides,
Al, Scott.
Al.
I'm old enough. Don't remind me.
Al, as you know, Al, I was talking with Liz at one point about how during the A-score days, you had specific projects you were working on, integrating, and the conversation now about equality and equity is so deep now and so broad, and the questions about things like the Vance Monument and all those the monument question, and so the work's not over. In other words, right? The
No.
work's the work's not over, and in many ways, it's, as I've said before, I mentioned last week that it's transformation, not just of laws anymore, but of really the heart, transforming communities to see us as I can say, as we can say in our church community, as brothers and sisters in Christ, and so that's the work. Those are the next, kind of next steps. Here at Trinity, we're going to continue this conversation for years to come, as we continue to understand who we are and how we can be agents of transformation for our own community and of Trinity, but also for our whole city. And so I can't thank you enough for being with us today. Liz, I can't thank you enough for being with us today.
Well, I was just wondering if Al had something maybe just to add to what you said about where we go from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, please.
Well, one of the things I would add, I had a conversation with my mom a few months before she died. And we lost her in 16. Of course, she'd had a good life. She was 91. And Mom was a very spiritual person. And she told me she was concerned about something. And I think about it today. She said, baby, we are losing our moral compass in America.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.
And when you look at what we're going through today, some of the fights we're having, when I look at what we're doing on the commission, what we bring up about reparations, the systemic racism, how the church is still the most segregated hour is 11 o'clock Sunday morning. And, and all of us are guilty. I'm sixth generation. No, my grandson is sixth generation in our church. We're over 150 years old, but it's still all Black church. So, but when you look at all that, I think it's going to be up to the faith communities to really make a lot of the changes that we need to make. But in doing that, one, you got to get outside of your walls. It's a different day. And two, the religious community has got to be open to people who they don't agree with. And at least have a discussion. Just because I might not believe in somebody's lifestyle, I don't disagree, and I will be the first to say that they have the same civil rights that I have. And this is where I think but in some religious communities now, it's not like Trinity or my church. They are going in another direction. I'll be honest with you. But I think we're going, and it's the silent majority in America, we're going to have to stand up and be heard. Because I found out, even talking to a lot of my conservative friends, that basically all of us want the same thing. We might disagree on how we get there some, but I think, like I said, we've got to get back to just the fundamentals in America of what's right and what's wrong.
One of the principles of nonviolent both communication and action is that our disagreements don't exist at the level of our needs.
Right. Well put.
Our disagreements exist at the level of the strategies we employ to meet our needs. So as you say, Al, as you talk with your friends who may be in a different political place, you still have, when we really talk well, we recognize we have the same needs. We want a safe place for our families.
Right.
We want to be able to have great jobs. We want to be able to go out to a restaurant. I mean, we all have those same needs, and of course, I would say this is the gospel of Jesus, and
Oh, it is.
so. Well, I just can't thank you enough for that
Oh, yeah.
reflection and
Always.
encouraging us, and being a community leader. Thank you for your
Thank
leadership
you for your leadership.
in the community of Asheville. All these
Buncombe County.
and Buncombe County for all of these years. It's this type of witness, as you say, that makes the difference over the long haul, and the work's not done yet.
Oh, by far, no, we still
Yeah.
got. Yeah.
Yeah.
But keep up the good work at Trinity, though. Like I said, I know a lot of members there over the years, and I've seen, what you've done. Yeah. And
Well,
I remember Reverend too. Yeah.
outstanding. Well, we can't thank you enough.
Yeah.
Thank
God
you.
bless you. Thank you for being with us for this whole
Thank you.
series, and we'll continue it in many ways.
Good.
God bless.
This is great. Yeah.
Care.
Take care.
And
Thanks.
have a great day.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye now.